Welcome to the first ever episode of the Bone Zone, a podcast sponsored by the Magnificast. And I know that Matt really likes that title. We've been talking about it, putting it in front of a lot of focus groups. Everybody loves it. Nobody's mad about it. This is the first episode of the Bone Zone, and I'm your co-crypt keeper for this one, Dean Detloff.
Oh, and I'm the guy who sweeps the dusty bones when they get too dusty, Matt Bernico.
That's right, and boy, do they ever get dusty. This one is going to be bone-focused, and I feel like I just need to maybe give people that trigger warning up front. That's right. There's going to be a lot of bones in the next hour or so.
A lot of bones in the next hour, because we're talking about a place we recently took a field trip to. Okay, so here's what you need to know. You don't need to know all the internal details of our lives, that's for sure. But I'll tell you this bit. You might know that Dean was in Scotland visiting me and my family and hanging out for a while, and that was cool. And then he left Scotland to go do a work thing in Rome, and then I went to go meet him in Rome because I'd never been there, and it seemed like a cool thing to go do. So I went to go meet Dean in Rome, and we walked around and saw all these great churches. Rome's full of them. In case if you're a person who loves churches and bones, Rome is the place for you. So anyways, while we were there kind of doing our various Rome field trips, we kind of stumbled upon a place that we thought we had to visit called Our Lady of the Conception of the Capuchins.
A normal place. A place that sounds normal.
That's a normal place. It's just it's okay. You walk up there and there's a big church and it's great. It's just like every other church you've seen in Rome so far. It's like beautiful Renaissance sort of Baroque style art everywhere. And this one is actually wild too, because it's less of a touristy kind of area. There are people that might be in there praying. Who knows? It's beautiful.
It's really normal, really regular.
It's so regular. We can't stress that enough. It is a normal church. But then you go downstairs and it's the worst thing you've ever seen. By which I mean there are not just like one room, but 6 different rooms full of human remains, bones, if you will, arranged in a really troubling architectural sort of way. Listen, I'm struggling to even say something about it, but that's because of what it is so overwhelmingly bony. It's just like kind of it escapes human explanation. Truly, Kant's sublime, just a really troubling sort of place to find yourself. But we did pay 10 euros to go in there, so I guess the joke's on us.
That's right. Paying to go to a haunted house for sure. It was a wild experience, and we both decided immediately after coming out of the church that we probably wouldn't be able to talk about anything else in this podcast until we got this out of our system. So I guess you're all gonna have to deal with that for the next hour. Man, we'll say more about what it is and why it's actually very cool. And guess what? It is still kind of the Magnificast. So at some point we'll even talk about a French philosopher and what he thinks about bone churches. Surprise. They talked about it all. But before we do, something I've been reflecting on a lot, Matt, talking about this place and kind of explaining it to other people and so on, is people have often asked me, like, what did you think when you came out of it? When you sort of passed by all these human bones, and folks, there are so many human bones, so we'll explain them in a moment. What did you think at the end? And my memory is that I've never laughed harder with you specifically about anything in my life than the Bone Church. And I feel like that moment of laughter is both like an incredibly powerful psychological defense mechanism that I do appreciate that evolution has given me, but also a recognition of how incredibly bizarre my actual religion is. So that's my my immediate reaction to this experience. Just what a funny place.
It was very funny. There's sort of a cathartic moment when you get on the outside finally, and it's just like, what did we just see? Yeah, I've never been so happy to be a Protestant that like I'm sort of adjacent but not responsible for that in any way. That's very cool. So neat. Dean, just for the we'll get to the history. We'll get to it all. I promise you. I swear. No bones about it. We will get to it all. But Dean, could you just give a quick description of like what the Bone Church is and what it was like to be inside of it for the listeners of this podcast.
Sure, sure. Okay, I'll give like maybe a brief sort of phenomenological experience report here. Like
Oh
this
my
is what
God.
what it's like to go in. The first thing you got to know is that you actually can't just go to the bones. You have to first go through an audio guided tour by the Capuchins, a Franciscan order who are responsible for the church. Responsible both in kind of a positive sense, like they have to take care of it, and also responsible in a kind of like, I guess this is their fault that this exists. So they're responsible for it, and you have to go through this audio guided thing, and the whole thing is designed to make you, first of all, realize that they know there's a bunch of bones. They know you're going to see the bones, and that's why you're there. You're there for the bones. And they also want you to know that like they're totally normal and cool guys, and and you should definitely be inspired and not freaked out by what you're about to see. That's kind of the vibe. You pass through several exhibits about the Capuchins and St. Francis, all kinds of stuff, and it all feels pretty boilerplate. Like, you know, I don't know, your grandma, she would love it. Your Catholic grandma, she'd be into it. She would see all this great Franciscan imagery, and she'd feel pretty good by the end of that part. And then they do just sort of dump you out into the first room of this crypt, the first of 6, by the way. And the first room has 2 skeletons. First, I'm gonna start small. I'm gonna paint a picture of this room. Imagine, if you will,
Sure.
dear listener, you're looking at a tableau, and in front of you are 2 skeletons, and they have hoods on, Capuchin style, but also, let's face it, Grim Reaper style. And surrounding them are a lot of skulls, arranged intentionally and meticulously. And above them are some other kind of artistic arrangements of human bones. And as your eye keeps going up, you get to the ceiling, where there is a full skeleton surrounded by vertebrae which form a circle. And the skeleton is holding a scythe, which, guess what, is also made out of bones. And the skeleton is also holding a pair of scales made out of bones. And as you kind of look back down, you'll discover that on the left and right of the room are also, you guessed it, more bones, including some skeletons laying down like they're asleep, but they're not. They're definitely dead. And the kicker is that right above you, maybe 2 inches above your head, is a chandelier also made out of bones that you could just kind of accidentally touch if you're not careful. And after seeing all the nice, normal Franciscan stuff, and they do assure you that they are normal, regular guys, and it's a normal, regular church, you do kind of come upon this really wild, kind of spirit Halloween-y, except that it's real sort of scene. And that's the first of 6 rooms that you're going to have to make it through, remembering all that they told you only moments before, that they are normal, regular dudes. I don't know, Matt, is that kind of your experience of that first room as well?
Yeah, I guess that's my experience of that room. That's it. That's what's in there. And there's bones in there, is the thing.
So many
They're
bones.
real human bones in this room. Let's do it. I'm just reviewing my pictures now on my phone, just to make sure I'm like sort of getting the vibe right. And so that's the first room. There's like the skeletons. There's the scythe. Yeah, it's all there. The second room, you're not going to believe this, Dean, but there's actually bones in that room too.
Mm-hmm.
That's the leg bones and thigh bones room.
Right.
Which
they're connected.
are
The leg bones
arranged-
are connected to the thigh bones.
That is true. There's also a lot of skulls. This is the room that has the centerpiece of the room is the 2 arms crossing, like the sort of Franciscan symbol.
The mummified arms.
Yeah, one is like a friar arm, and one is a different like outside arm, another person's arm. Just quickly to hit some of the other rooms, just so you know what's going on in these rooms. The 4th room is. Again, you're going to be surprised about this, but there's bones in this one, and this is called, this is like the pelvis room. So for whatever reason, this room is just like, it's all pelvis bones, like mostly pelvis bones, I would say. Mm-hmm. And there are 3 sort of like mummified skeletons that have the capuchin like hood on, and they are like within a chapel built out of pelvises, like solely pelvises. Guys, I'm not kidding at all. Like, Google this, and this is it. This is all that it is. It's bones in there. The room after that, you're once again not going to believe it, but it's just bones. It's 3 more skeletons in the capuchin robes with bones. And then, Dean, do you want to talk about the last one, the mass chapel that is in there?
Okay, yeah. There's actually 2 more rooms.
Oh, it's 2. There's 2 more rooms.
Slightly different. So, okay, you've gone through the skeleton room, the leg bone, thigh bone room, the pelvis room, the skull room. And then you do get to a chapel that they use to celebrate Mass. And apparently, I read, they celebrate Mass there on All Souls Day, on Halloween, which feels incredibly spooky.
That's great.
Dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, many adjectives one might use to describe it for sure. Rules, scary, spooky, yucky. This room, so important, does not have any bones in it. And that is important because you've just passed through so many bones. It's nice to kind of get like a chance to catch your breath. One catch is that there is a heart in there, but it's safely locked away in the wall. They just kind of tell you, trust us, there's a heart in here.
You don't have to see the heart. So good. I love that.
You don't. You can't even see it, which is great. And then the last room, though, is the one that reminds you that actually there are still bones in here. The last room has a painting of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, which is great. Love that. But it is the painting is framed by bones, by human skeleton bones. So that's the last room that you go through before you do get to go to a gift shop and look at postcards and t-shirts with bones on them and all the rest of it. But you have to sort of pass through the gauntlet of bones. You get a break for Mass, then you see a few more bones, and then they finally let you out.
That is the experience. I cannot stress this enough. The bones are so close to you. Like the chandelier bones are so close to you that you could definitely touch them if you wanted to. Or if you were just like on accident, sort of, you're too tall, maybe. I don't know. You've got too many bones in your body, and you could definitely touch them. And that's a troubling idea. I didn't, so I'm safe.
Just statistically, the bones are touched at least once a day. I mean, more than that. Like, there are so many tourists that go through, and surely so many tourists that are not very mindful of what's going on. The bones are definitely touched by human flesh many times. There was one moment when I was in there. So, like, it's a crypt, so it's kind of underground, but also not quite underground, kind of like a basement. And it's like a basement apartment. So you can, like, there's, like, windows where you can sort of see ground level that are maybe at the height of your head and shoulders. And the windows are open, thank God, because I can't imagine what it smells like in there when they're closed. And when I was backing up, I backed up into the open window, which opens inside, and I was so scared that I had touched a bone. I've never been more scared in my life to have touched an actual human bone, and man, it just feels like a place that's really ripe for some jump scares.
I was so careful not to touch anything, so I wasn't worried about that, but I'm glad you made it out unscathed, mostly. Something else that I think we do need to address really quickly here before we get on to like harder facts and bits is that they do make you go through the museum first. You mentioned this a minute ago. So important. And they do also make you do an audio guided tour. Like, there's not an option. Like, most museums you'd go to, they're like, oh, do you want to pay extra to get this great audio tour? And my answer is always no. I can read the plaque. Thank you very much. I'm an adult. I know how to read. But this time, I didn't have the option whatsoever. I had to listen. And the whole audio guided tour is like a fictional conversation between a very old man and a very young Capuchin monk. And they're just having this great conversation about, what all this means, the symbolism, the sort of experience of like a close encounter with death, and also what it means to be resurrected. And I cannot tell you, like, on the one hand, it's like very frustrating because I want to see the bones. I came here for the bones. Let me see the bones. But on the other hand, it's like, thank you so much for slowing me down a little bit because I was not prepared. And this at least kind of gave me like a little bit of like buffer, some cushion to like kind of understand the whole situation. But it's great because I'm sure some people go there just to see these bones in a sort of perverted way, and this maybe stops them and weeds them out. They do recognize, even in this audio tour, that there was a time when you could just pop on downstairs in the church to see the bones, and this is like something they've created, a whole museum. and audio tour experience, they've employed at least 3 or 4 people to sort of man the whole situation so that you can't just go straight to the bones. And I think that's really smart, really a good discernment of human nature.
What is funny about it, though, is there's no real staff in the museum itself. They really kind of rely on you to decide, when to push the button to hear the next bit of this great narrative by
That's
these
true.
two actors. And, it does kind of beg the question, like, how fast is too fast to get from the museum to the bones? Like, at what point would someone be like, sir, you have to go. You can't be here. You are a bone pervert. You're not allowed.
They should have the staff in the museum clocking you to make sure you spend a good 45 minutes taking in all of the museum-y kind of stuff first. Oh, hey, here's another important piece of the puzzle of this museum experience, is that there's also an audio tour for kids in case you brought your kids with you. And the group of people who did go into the museum/crypt before us did have several small children, and I would love to hear their review. If those 2 kids out there have a podcast of their own where they talk about the Bone Church, I need to listen to it. I need to know what they thought of it all and what they think of it right now. I showed the pictures of the Bone Church to my son. I knew that he's a spooky loving guy, and I showed it to him, and he was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen." And I was trying to tell him it's weird though, and he was like, "No, it's really cool." So I guess kids probably love it. It's cool, but it's troubling.
Yeah, it is cool, but troubling for sure. It is funny to explain it to people. I explained it to some friends just this afternoon, and they, I don't know, had some interesting reactions to it for sure. I explained it to my wife, who works in hospice care, and she loves the Bone Church. I have to go back to Rome in a month, and she is going to come with me, and she is psyched to go to the Bone Church, which is great for her. I cannot wait to hear what she thinks about it.
We need to do a follow-up interview with Emily about what she thinks and to give us her take on the Bone Church, because I bet she has a great one.
Yeah, it will be an actually meaningful and profound reaction to it for sure. I guarantee she won't come out immediately cracking up so that she can preserve her sanity from what just happened. That's right. Yeah, it is great to kind of find out what people think of the Bone Church. I do think, okay, we'll slowly pivot here to being a little more serious, although, man, it's hard to
Not much.
Not much. It is pretty wild that this whole place is designed to confront you with the reality of death in an interesting way, and it is a memento mori place. There's a plaque in there that says something like, what does it say? What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be, reminding you that you're going to die. And that is pretty interesting, and a lot of people that I've talked to, and myself just kind of reflecting on it, I think find that kind of a refreshing thing, even if it is disturbing and unsettling, that there is a place in the world where you kind of have to deal with that, or is trying to get you to deal with it, before you have to or whatever. And I think that's true. But also, it is just a lot of bones. I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind. It's right. Maybe too many bones.
Here's the thing. I swear this will be the last jokey thing I say before we talk about the historical part. Maybe. But we spent literally all day walking around Rome and seeing bones of saints. We saw Saint Valentine, and we saw Saint Victoria. We saw a bunch of people. Catherine of Siena, not her bones, but her tomb. Come on, we saw a lot of stuff.
We saw part of Thomas Aquinas.
That's right. We saw part of Thomas Aquinas. That's a lot of memento mori. I was thinking about death a lot. I did not need to see 6 more rooms of 3,000 people and their bones to think about death and contemplate it. I just didn't need to, but I did, and I'm thinking about death right now. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this Bone Church and maybe some of the weird ideas behind it, and we'll get to French philosophy here in a hot second too. So here's a little bit about the history of this Bone Church. The Convent of the Immaculate Conception. This is the Capuchin monks that were there connected to this host church, was built in 1626 by Cardinal Antonio Barberini. Barberini, by the way, if you're in Rome, that's the metro stop you get off at for the Bone Church. There's a lot of good restaurants around it. You can go have a nice gelato after you see the Bone Church.
And you're gonna have to.
The convent itself was built by Father Michel de Bergamo, who designed the building, and he kind of like oversaw the works in creating the crypts. That was in 1631. An underground area used as burial for both religious and lay people was located under the right chapels of the church. However, no contemporary descriptions remain of the initial stage of the crypt. This is like 1630s. The church is built. The convent is built. The crypt is built. It's all there. There's not really a description of it. The Bone Church does not exist at this point in time.
It's just a church with bones.
It's just a church with bones in it. An important distinction. In 1732, in the 3 underground chapels, there were simply heaps of bones. The first source describing the crypt dates back to 1775. And this is an interesting tidbit, I suppose.
A great cameo.
It's in the travel diary of the Marquis de Sade, who reports the great impression aroused by the decorations of those rooms made with bones and skulls. It is therefore believed that the decorative apparatus of the crypt can date back to a period between 1732 and 1775. Overall, the bones of about 3,700 people are collected, including the remains of the Capuchins moved there from the convent of San Bonaventure. As designer of the decorations, Father Raphael de Roma has been suggested, or alternatively, Father Norberto Baumgartner of Vienna, who are both Capuchin painters. But no one's sure which dude is actually responsible for this whole mess of bones. Okay, so this is like, this whole thing is such an interesting thing. The church was built. They put bones in there. They're moving from like one convent to the next, and they had to bring all of their dead with them, which is already a wild concept. But it makes sense.
I could leave them behind.
Well, no, I guess not. If it were me, I would just leave them in the cemetery that they're in. But hey, whatever, man. I'm not the head monk here.
Matt, don't worry. When we do have to move your body, I'll make sure that you get to the cool church and you're not stuck in the lame.
Thank
church.
you. Thank you so much for moving my body in the future, to be buried, hopefully. Anyways, so they moved all the bones. They have a heap of bones in 1732, and then, like, I don't know, a few decades later, somebody awful like Marquis de Sade, who, by the way, was in Italy. I did this deep dive on him the other day because I was so interested in like what the hell he is doing anywhere, because he's awful. But he was actually like escaping the authorities who were like arresting him for doing all types of sexual violence, and he was like taking a trip in Italy. So like he is in Italy for like a little bit, and then his mom arranges with the Italian officials to actually have him arrested there as well. So like in this short sort of escape from French prison, the Marquis de Sade is in Italy and then like sees the Bone Church and then immediately gets arrested afterwards. Insane. It's also crazy too because that's the first source that you have in history of the Bone Church existing is from Marquis de Sade, the world's worst guy.
A big freak.
Yeah, a huge freak. But it's wild that between 1732 and 1775, that's when the Bone Church is built. And it's one of these two guys, and we're not sure which one it is. Like, can you imagine that scenario playing out? Like, you're the abbot of these Capuchins, or I don't know if Capuchins have abbots or not. They probably do. Why not?
You're the big daddy.
Right. You're the dad of the monks. And one day you go to breakfast and somebody says to you, "Hey, have you seen what's going on down in the crypt?" And you're like, "No, what's happening?" Yeah, well, like someone just started kind of like building something out of the bones down there. Oh, okay. I guess I'll just let that go. No problem to investigate that. It's not important to find out exactly who's doing it, I suppose. And then you go back to eating your breakfast. Insane. Crazy. Bonkers. The whole story is extremely suspicious, and I'm certain that there's like a Dan Brown-esque conspiracy behind it all. The Capuchins know exactly who built this thing and why, and I need to get to the bottom of it someday.
It is so funny. There are so many funny things about this history specifically. I loved when you're on the tour and, you know, this audio drama of the old man and the young Capuchin, they're talking about the crypt and everything else. They're talking about how it happened. And the guy playing the young Capuchin talks about how it's mentioned by the Marquis de Sade, and he says it so flippantly, and it's like so jarring actually, because he is such a freak and a pervert, and you're like, wow, this is the last place I would have thought to be thinking about the Marquis de Sade. But there it is. They just kind of gloss over it. What a wild mention in the audio tour. Also love the idea that maybe these are two painters, and you got to imagine, like the two candidates are painters. You got to imagine the dad of all the monks. He's like, yeah, be my guest for sure. Decorate that crypt. It's pretty yucky down there. I trust your vision. Love what you did up here. Great frescoes, etc. And going down there like 6 months later and being like, oh shit, this is not a painting. Actually, this is something very different. I mean, who did this is kind of the perennial question that Matt and I have been asking since we went through it. Who has done this? And as you said, Matt, the Capuchins, they have to know. You don't accidentally get 3,000 bones up on a wall with nobody knowing exactly how that happened.
Yeah, exactly. But to be fair, if I was the dad monk and somebody did come to me and was like, hey, who did that down there? I'd definitely be like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure.
It is great. Like the church, as I said, they go out of their way to remind you that they are normal, regular guys. And it's so important that you know how normal and regular they are before you get to the incredibly weird thing that you're about to see, all these bones. And what's great is, like, they know that it is weird. They have constructed an entire apparatus to try to kind of soften the blow of how weird it really is without taking out the good parts of why it's weird. And it's so great because, like, they're like, we know it's weird, and we will invite the entire world to see how weird it is, but we absolutely will not tell you who did it. And that to me is a big Catholic red flag.
I'm just imagining like the Tim Robinson sketch where he's like in the hot dog costume, but it's like a monk covered in bones. And he's like, we all have to find the guy who did this.
I mean, so many Tim Robinson sketches. We were also saying, as you can probably guess, it was also the night that the skeletons came to life, right? Basically all day. So yeah, a lot of great. I think you should leave. And you know what? I did think we should leave by the end of that tour for sure.
And we did leave. It was great to get out of there. Oh, okay. Hang on. One more step before we talk about philosophy. We went through the whole situation. We were prepared. I was prepared. I told Dean too that like when we're in there, we can't take pictures of the bones. Obviously, that would be in bad taste. And the internet had told me previously that you can't do that. You can't take pictures. But we got there and it's like, actually, it's okay. You can take pictures if you want to. And in fact, every person that was in like the group with us was like, they had their like their fancy DSLRs out. They were zooming in. They were getting all kinds of great angles. And that's fine. I took pictures too. I'm not gonna. I mean, I took them on my phone because I'm not like I'm not a crazy person. But
you're not a bone pervert.
I'm not a bone pervert. Is the thing about me that you need to know. But then later, after we did go to the bone church, I just like did a quick search on TikTok to find how much content there is, and there's so much content of just like, like blonde women who are like Americans who are like, let me tell you about the coolest place in Rome that I went. Like, get ready with me before I go to the bone church. And then they just show you content of them like at the bone church and like doing TikToks at the bone church. So anyways, I took pictures, and I think though they should go back to the policy where it's not allowed. I don't think people should be able to take pictures of the bone church. I'm against it now. Having a real Susan Sontag moment where I don't think you should be able to take pictures of it.
There was a guy in there who was like a great art student. He was drawing all kinds of things in the museum.
Oh, that's right.
Like drawing pictures of crucifixes and stuff. And by the time he got to the bone church, he was obviously drawing bones. And I feel like that is fine.
Yeah,
that's tasteful.
Of course.
He's an artist, and he is working on his craft. And by the time he gets out, he's going to have so many great insights from spending all this time with these bones. I feel like that is a kind of gaze I can really appreciate. The idea of snapping it on my phone, I posted so many pictures from this trip to Instagram. I cannot bring myself to put a bone church picture on the internet. I can only show it to people in the privacy of a conversation about the whole thing. It is very uncomfortable. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be so uncomfortable with it, but boy, am I ever. It feels weird. It's weird. There's nothing else to say about it. It's weird. It's weird, and no matter how meaningful and cool And whatever it is always going to be weird to me. It's bizarre.
Okay, it is weird. It is bizarre. But let's now spend the second half of this episode talking about just why it's weird and bizarre. And maybe it's not the bones' fault. Maybe it's our own fault. I've been just hurriedly Googling different names of my favorite French philosophers and critical theorists, trying to figure out like who has said something about the Bone Church, because you know that these like sick French philosophers, they've written about it. And one of them has. I've looked around quite a bit, and only one of them has, and it's actually not surprising which one. So Jean Baudrillard, he's a French philosopher who is probably most famous for writing a book called Simulation and Simulacra, and also a book called Symbolic Exchange and Death. Baudrillard died in the late 90s, if not the 2000s. I can't remember exactly which. But a very famous French philosopher. You might know him. He's like referenced really in a strange way in the movie The Matrix. Anyways, he's a guy who has a lot to say about simulations and things that seem real but aren't quite real. There's a lot going on with him as a guy. And in fact, if you listen to our podcast, you'll probably hear me talk about him on more than one occasion. In Baudrillard's book, Symbolic Exchange and Death, he has actually a pretty big footnote that is really fascinating about a bone church, but not the bone church we went to. So kind of in a troubling thing to think about. There's actually a few more bone churches out there in the world that maybe we'll talk about in a minute. There's another one in Italy, in Palermo, that is another Capuchin crypt, but though it's more of a catacombs than a crypt. Not that I know the difference, but it's similar stuff, like sort of mummified skeletons posed in robes, and it's a wild. I looked at pictures at least, and it seems crazy. Anyways, Jean Baudrillard has some interesting things to say about the. Well, he always has some interesting things to say about the representation of death and sort of like the signs and symbols we use to kind of talk about death or think about death in our postmodern world. But he has a really interesting insight in this footnote that I think is actually worth reading and maybe talking about. So I'm going to read this at length, and then we'll talk about it, Dean. So get ready for some French philosophy. Jean Baudrillard writes, "In short, every society has its sarcophagic rituals. Embalming, the artificial preservation of the flesh, is one of its variants. The practices of funeral homes, which appear so ridiculous and misplaced to us, idealists of natural death that we are, therefore remain faithful to the most remote traditions. The funeral home scenario goes the other way. Here it becomes a question of the dead retaining their appearance of life, the naturalness of life. He still smiles at you, the same colors, the same skin. He seems himself even after death. He is even a little fresher than he was when he was alive, and lacks only speech. But we can still hear this in a stereo." Okay. "A faked death, idealized in the colors of life, the secret death, is that life is natural, and death is against nature." This is like the assumption. "Death must therefore be naturalized in a stuffed simulacrum of life. In all of this, there is, on the one hand, a refusal to let death signify, take on the force of a sign, and behind the sentimental nature of fetishism, on the other hand, a great ferocity as regards the dead himself. Rotting and change are forbidden, and instead of being carried over to death, and thus the symbolic recognition of the living, he is maintained as a puppet within the orbit of the living in order to serve as an alibi in a simulacrum of their own lives." A simulacrum here, by the way, is like a simulation without a referent. So it's like this idea that the person who is dead is now appearing in a way they never appeared before, even, right? They look better than they did, or more alive than they did, something like that. "This is what separates those societies that are afraid neither of the sign nor of death, since they make it signify overtly from an ideological societies where everything is buried under the natural, where signs have become nothing but designs, entertaining the illusion of natural reason. Death is the first victim of this ideologization. Rigidly set in the banal simulacrum of life, it becomes shameful and obscene." Okay, this is where we get to the Capuchins. "There's an enormous difference between these sanctuaries and drugstores of smiling sterilized death and the corridors of the Capuchin convent in Palermo, or in this case, Rome. where 3 centuries of disinterred corpses meticulously fossilized in the clay of the cemetery, with skin, hair, and nails, lie flat or suspended by the shoulders in close ranks along the length of reserved corridors. The corridor of the religious, the corridor of the intellectuals, the corridor of women and children. So in the Palermo crypts, they have like these different corridors for different groups of people who are in them, and some of them are some of them are religious brothers, some of them are children, some of them are women. You get the idea. And they're all still dressed
Normal regular stuff.
normal regular stuff that doesn't need much of an explanation. Just, come on. But they're all still dressed in a crude wrap, or on the contrary, in costume with gloves and powdered muslin. There's even there's a section called the Corridor of the Professionals, where it's just like, it's the skeletons, but they're like in business suits, which is bizarre to me. Anyways.
A great thing for your punk band album cover.
It is rife with content to be mined, unfortunately. Okay, and then he says that in the pale half-light from the barred windows, 8,000 corpses, in an incredible multiplicity of attitudes, sardonic, languid heads, bent, fierce or timid, a dance of death which was for a long time before becoming the Grieven Museum for the tourists, a place for dominical walks for the relatives and friends who used to come to see the dead, to acknowledge them, show them to their children with familiarity of the living, a dominicality of death, similar to those of the Mass or the theater, a Baroque death, the solidity of a society capable of exhuming its dead, of opening a route to them halfway between intimacy and the spectacle of bearing without fright or obscene curiosity. That is, without the effects of sublimation or seriousness to which we are accustomed to, the theater of death, where cruelty is still a sign. What a contrast with the fragility of our societies, which are incapable of confronting death without wane or humor or perverse fascination. That's us. What a contrast with the anxious warding off of the funeral homes. Okay, that is a lot to take in, and there's a lot going on here. But I think it's actually pretty profound to think about. I don't know. I went to a funeral not that long ago, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, it is just like Baudrillard's kind of saying here, right? The funeral there's a weird simulacrum. You're taking a person who's dead and you're kind of making them appear alive in a really weird way. And it is sterile, and like everything is like pristine and well manicured, and like there's not really a sense of like death as it actually exists. Like this is like a complicated way of saying it, but there's like a reality to death that is missing from the death that you'd see at a funeral home, and maybe for good reason, because it's like upsetting and troubling and tough. But there's something markedly different going on in the Bone Church that I think is actually kind of fascinating, where you're confronted with death as the reality, not even like in a romantic way, because of the weird decontextualization of all of the bones, but you're like encountering death maybe in like the closest thing you can get to the real. There's still sort of a symbolic layer because of all of the church stuff that's happening in it, but this is like as close to real death, I think, as you'll probably ever actually see and ever actually encounter, apart from maybe your own, or if you see, something horrible in your life or whatever. But it made me think a lot about the ways that we encounter death and the ways that we try to buffer ourselves from it, even when we actually have to rub up against it. And I don't think that there's like a moral lesson here that like this society would be better. I mean, maybe it would. But there is something kind of weird about a society like ours that we have that's, founded on death, like explicitly, the dispossession of indigenous people from their lands, colonial wars, the violence of wage labor and like heteronormative relationships, all this kind of violence and death that we have that like is at the very foundation of the capitalist society that we live in. But we're actually too afraid to look at actual death as it exists in the world. And I don't know. That's my radical take on what I saw at the Bone Church.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that there is something to that, right? That like, and that's the purpose of the Bone Church. I mean, what Baudrillard is saying, I think, is right and not right. Like, it's right insofar as it's true that this kind of space confronts you with death in a really like, I don't know, upfront, close way. But I would hesitate to say it's kind of without, signs of its own, which isn't quite what Baudrillard is saying. But
Right.
there is a really important symbolic layer on it, which is that the whole thing is designed to make you confront death in a really important way. And also to do it in the context of the Christian narrative. Like at the end of the Bone Church in Rome, as I said at the beginning of the episode, you pass through the chapel where they have Mass, and you also pass through or pass by a painting of the resurrection of Lazarus. And the whole thing, I think, is designed to unsettle you for sure, to confront you with the reality of death and the fact that you're going to die, but also to kind of confront you with the doctrine of the resurrection. And in other churches as well, which have this kind of thing, like bones all over the place that you can go look at. They also are almost like used as kind of like hell houses in a weird way. Like they will often carry like a warning not to sin and to repent and so on, because it's confronting you with the reality of death and kind of forcing you to ask that question, if you died tonight, where are you going to go? It's this kind of weird Catholic evangelical appeal at the end here. And I think that, there are obviously lots of ways in which that can be very bad and toxic, and is, and probably was, especially in the 1700s, no doubt about that. But I think that what Baudrillard is definitely right about is that there is a tendency, especially in a kind of capitalist and hyper-mediatized society, to alienate ourselves from everything that isn't caught up in the kind of signs that we use to signal that we participate in the market economy, including death. I don't know, like if you ever have to navigate planning a funeral, which is very bad and annoying, there's all kinds of ways that even the process of death is kind of wrapped up into like strategies for alienating people from actually encountering the loss of a person. Lots of ways of trying to preserve that person or sort of repeat that person's lives in these simulated ways, like Baudrillard discusses. And there is something really kind of, I don't know, like bizarrely like comforting about a situation where it's like these people are just like dead in a big way. And
Right.
Some of them, we don't even know their names. Like this is a pile of pelvises. Who knows who they belong to? Like they're gone in a way that you will also one day be super gone. And I think that is such a like resistance to the kind of virtual reality of capitalism that is pretty unique and fulfills a really important function for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, who has time for death and grief when you have to go back to work, in a capitalist society? So
Yeah.
it's a it's a roadblock to really like think about death in a big way.
Yeah. I think also there's something interesting about the way that what Baudrillard is saying is true, but our experience of the Bone Church is sort of funny because it ends up alienating itself from itself at certain points. Like, for example, the tour is one part of it for sure, but the fact that they do empty you out into a gift shop after you walk through all the bones is so strange, and it is so funny. Like there's something really funny about it. Like there's all these rooms where they're like, you're gonna die, you're gonna be a pelvis, you're gonna be thigh bones and everything else. And then they're like, anyway, you could like buy this t-shirt with the skeleton on it if you want, or you can buy like a magnet, or, you can buy a postcard with like a really disturbing picture of a bunch of skeletons and send that to your nephew and be like, check this out. Like it kind of ends up getting reinscribed into like the tourism economy in a way that is really strange and kind of sucks up or like commodifies the whole experience of, your own memento mori in a way that's really quite bizarre and again very funny. Like there's a kind of humor to it because it is such a juxtaposition to like what you're supposed to encounter, the meaning of life and death at the bottom of a church, and then you're like, anyway, you could spend your money here too.
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, let me say that I did buy a t-shirt, and the t-shirt is great,
of course,
and it rules. I mean, how can you be in that situation after undergoing such a stressful and weird time and not buy the t-shirt? Second of all, I think that like the tourist part is actually something that really has to be reckoned with in the whole equation. And I felt this, I think, everywhere we were at in Rome, that we're walking into these places that are extremely beautiful, but they are fundamentally like places of worship. And sometimes you'll even encounter them as that, in the sense that like you'll see other people praying, or like mass will be beginning or ending. Or even there was the Church of St. Ignatius, very cool. It was like, come in for now, but it's going to be closed in a little bit because people are getting married in the church or whatever, right? It's like, it's such an interesting experience though to be in Rome, because you're constantly butting up against that weird, like, well, I'm a tourist, but I'm also a Christian, and I'm also like, I'm finding these places very interesting. Like I would find a museum, but I'm also finding them really interesting in the way that I would, encounter some kind of like spiritual space. So it's kind of like a weird juxtaposition of, I don't know, whatever you're doing as a tourist and whatever you're doing as like a Christian, kind of like inhabiting these spaces, that is very complicated and alienating and makes these spaces like work and not work all at the same time. It's very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, something we talked about a little bit when we were in Rome is that it's really weird to be in Rome as a practicing Catholic from North America, I feel, because the ideology of being American, broadly construed, is basically that you exist in a place that's kind of without history or has a manufactured history. Everything is very present, focused, immediate, and so on. And, Catholicism breaks through that in some ways because it is a very historicized and kind of strange expression of Christianity that can, rub up against that intentional historical amnesia in ways that can destabilize it, although don't necessarily do that. But when you go to Rome, with that sort of mindset of like, I don't know, you're a person, like your country is, not that old, kind of historically speaking. And then you're in this city that is extremely old and is like empire built on top of empire, built on top of empire. And you're wandering around and you're like, man, this is like the mothership. This is the headquarters of my whole religion. It's like the Roman Catholic Church and you're in Rome. I feel like probably people have a wide range of experiences of it, and that's all great. My own experience of it was funny because I think maybe like there's part of myself or part of general Catholics that feel like, oh, I'll go there and it will feel kind of like, oh, this is the heart of it or where I belong or something. But man, it was exactly the opposite. It's like, whoa, this is like a real religion that I have been participating in my entire life. And man, this is not how I experience it. This is not my kind of Catholicism or the kind that I grew up with. And there's something really like cool about that and also very weird about it. And I think especially when it comes to something like the Bone Church, it is such a like stark kind of reminder that Christianity is so old and so weird and full of so many bizarre ideas and kind of like ways of trying to get you to like confront yourself and reality in really, with really unique methods, incredibly bizarre methods. And it's such a hugely different sort of thing from the like presentist world of what it's like to be an American Christian, especially if you've been through like evangelicalism or something like that, where it's so immediate, right? It's like, or supposed to be, it's just you and Jesus Christ and your relationship with God. And man, when you're in Rome, you're like, no way, it's like you and Jesus Christ and also these 3,000 dead monks, like you're all in it together. And there's something really really profound about that, actually.
Oh my God, that is that's a great point. I always think about, like if you go to like an evangelical church, they'll turn the lights down. So it's only you and Jesus. There's nobody standing next to you. But like, what if they turn the lights on and it was 3,000 dead monks and all their bones are in the room too? That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's spooky season, and man, it feels like Halloween there, but it's not. It's just regular life, regular Christianity trying to get you to come to Jesus and repent of your sins. And even if you don't, you're going to be bones.
Well, folks, the bones are the skeleton's money, and so are the worms. And thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can... If you join the Patreon, that'd be really nice of you. You can join our big community of listeners who also will one day be bones in our Discord channel where we are all becoming bones. And I have posted the pictures of the bones in the Discord channel if you need to see them. That's a place you can access the bone pictures. If you're a bone pervert, please don't. If that's you, if that's your thing, please don't. Please don't do that.
If you're a bone pervert, at least subscribe at a higher tier than $2. That's what I'll say.
Please. Our intro music is by Mario Armstrong. Our outro music is by The Logical Spoon, and we'll see you next time.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. You keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear, do you really mean this? I said, I only know what I feel right now. I said, poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do. Poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do in my town. I don't wanna get up for church in the morning,